Welcome to Kathryn Raaker's World. Innovation, culture, adventure, fashion and health, artists, destinations, traditions. This is Kathryn Raaker's World.
Hi, this is Kathryn Raaker of Kathryn Raaker's World. I'm very honored to have Western Hills Hamilton County State Representative Bill Seitz, who currently serves as the Majority Leader of the Ohio House of Representatives. Known for his colorful floor speeches and legal acumen, in a 2016 ranking of all 132 legislatures published by Columbus Monthly Magazine, Seitz was rated Best Speechmaker, Savviest, Funniest, and Most Knowledgeable, and was also recognized as second most effective and hardest working. He has put these talents to good use on issues that matter to his constituents. Seitz began his public service career as a member of the Cincinnati Board of Education and the St. Antoninus Parish Education Commission. He was twice elected Green Township trustee, where he also served as president of the Hamilton County Township Association. He has never forgotten his local government roots. Welcome to our show.
Delighted to be with you, Kathryn. It's great to be with you on this glorious day.
Yes, it is, because I'll tell you what, it's been hot, then cool, and then now we have 70s here in Cincinnati. You know, we've been friends for a very long time. We were both in our local Kiwanis group.
Right.
And today, things are really different. And we had you on the show a few months ago on a bill that you were doing in the House. Our election is coming up very quickly. And a lot has changed in our country. I'd like to hear some of your views.
Sure. Well, thank you. And a lot has changed in a couple months due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And things were roaring along. We had an economy that was like a Porsche running down the interstate at 90 miles an hour. And all of a sudden, due to, I think, flawed science and bad decisions made by governors across the country, the economy went into a ditch. Right now in Ohio, the unemployment rate is 26%. That is actually 2 points higher than the highest it ever was during the Great Depression. We have a projected $5.4 billion state budget deficit by the end of June 2021, whereas before we were running a surplus, whereas before unemployment was at record lows. Everything was great. And then all of a sudden, we decided to commit economic suicide by throwing the state's economy into lockdown. It will take a long time to dig ourselves out of this hole. We are not alone. Many other states are the same. But now that we have had the experience of hindsight, I think we're beginning to realize that we have left far too much power in the hands of unelected bureaucrats who are issuing these continual orders that prevent people from going about their daily lives and that have had a draconian impact on the economy. I'll give you just one example from this week. I was finally able to get the governor and his health director to allow wedding reception halls to open, provided that they had a capacity of 300 people or less at tables, 10 people to a table, and 6 feet apart, just like restaurants. But they said no dancing. No dancing. Now, wait a minute now. The bride and the groom would like to have a wedding dance. And they're certainly not going to be socially distant 2 hours later when the wedding reception is over.
No,
right?
They're not.
The father and the daughter lived in the same family their whole life. They should be allowed to have a dance. The mother and the son, similarly, part of the same family. They should be allowed to have a dance. So the folks who own wedding reception halls were very grateful to me for prevailing on the governor to get at least some opening. But they're saying that the brides still are not wanting to follow through with their receptions because if we can't have a dance, We don't want to have it, all right? We are getting silly about these rules and regulations. It is preposterous what's going on. So we in the Ohio House of Representatives are fighting back. We passed a bill a couple weeks ago that restricts the power of the health director to allow her to issue emergency orders for 14 days. After that, she must come before a legislative committee if she wants to extend those orders, modify those orders, replace those orders with something substantially similar. And that legislative committee, which has been around since 1977, it has the power to review any proposed agency rule or regulation for its impact on business. So we are trying to constrain the powers of the Board of Health, State Board of Health, to prevent them from issuing what has now become a 100-day lockdown of the Ohio economy. Similarly, we passed another bill a couple weeks ago that removes the criminal penalties for violating the edicts of the Ohio Department of Health, replacing that with a civil fine of $150. People should not have to go to jail like people were jailed in Texas for opening their business, trying to earn a living. People should not be subject to criminal penalties for trying to earn a living. So those are a couple of examples of what we did 2 weeks ago. Just this week, we did something else that's very important.
What did you do?
Well, the next phase of this is something called contact tracing. Contact tracing means bureaucrats will go out to the home of someone who has COVID-19. And they will want to know everyone you have been with, what you have done. They will look for your medical information. Now, that's nothing new. They've been using contact tracing for a long time. But people in this current environment are very worried at what the government is going to do with that information.
That's right.
So what we did this week is we passed a bill, carried it with an amendment that I put into the bill that says that anyone seeking to do contact tracing will have to get the informed written consent of the people that they want to talk to. Just like we all have to sign informed consent forms when we go see the doctor or when we go to the hospital.
What if you refuse?
And if you refuse, the bill goes on to say you have the right to refuse, and the government cannot force you to comply or penalize you in any way because you choose not to give this information. Finally, what we are doing in the bill is we are saying all of the information that people voluntarily do provide is not a public record and will be protected under HIPAA against disclosure, just like your other medical records. So our hope is that as Dr. Acton in Ohio and her minions move forward with this contact tracing, our hope is that people will be more inclined to voluntarily participate if they know that that information will not be used for nefarious purposes by the government.
Can we replace her?
Well, the governor has the power to replace the health director.
Because
the legislature does not have that power.
You know, in the beginning of the show, you said that a lot of health officials have a lot of power that are not elected. Well, let me ask this question. If people are not happy with the different people that are in power right now, giving all these edicts, right? Is there a way to change that?
Well, there is a way for the legislature to limit the powers of the Ohio Department of Health because, after all, we created the statutes that gave the Department of Health those powers. And that's what we did a couple weeks ago. But the determination of who runs the Department of Health in Ohio is a cabinet-level decision that the governor gets to make. And the legislature does not get to replace cabinet officials, just like in the United States Congress. The United States Congress does not have the power to remove cabinet-level officials. That's the president's prerogative. I think the current director of the Ohio Department of Health is well-meaning. But unfortunately, she's relied on models that have proven to be very wrong. She predicted 2.5 months ago that we would have 10,000 cases a day in Ohio. The fact of the matter is, right now, there are only 812 COVID patients in Ohio hospitals as of today, of which only 285 are in the ICU. And we have 34,000 hospital beds in Ohio. Now, originally, these lockdowns were because she wanted to flatten the curve and prevent the hospital systems from getting overrun. The hospital systems were never in danger of getting overrun. And the fact of the matter is, she relied on models that were so far wrong that if she were a field goal kicker, she wouldn't just be wide right or wide left, she wouldn't even have kicked the ball anywhere near the stadium because those models were so wrong. And based on that, again, we went into an economic tailspin, and now it's our challenge in the legislature to restart the economy.
Well, I'm not crazy about tracing.
That's why this bill was so important to
Because anybody that's had COVID-19
right.
isn't going to like it.
I understand that. That's why we passed this bill, to put guardrails around the contact tracing process.
Right.
We want to be sure that people give their informed consent, that they know that it's voluntary, that it's not compulsory, that the government can't penalize them for failing to cooperate, and that all the information that they choose to provide will be non-public information. I don't think it's the general public's business to know what a particular person's medical history is, or who their friends are, or who they hung around with for the last 14 days. I don't think that's public information that needs to be shared. The health department may have a valid reason to know that in order to go to those folks and say, you might have been exposed, you might want to get tested. I have no problem with that.
Okay, because I think your doctors actually send that information to the Board of Health.
I don't think they do. I don't think they do. They are required to report cases of COVID, but they are not required to report who you hung around with for the last 14 days.
Not who you hung around with.
Right.
But that you had it.
Yes, they are required to
Because
required to
what they
report
do is then
Yes.
contact that person
Yes.
with a list of questions.
Yes.
Then they send you an email that gives you the right to go back to work.
Right. I understand that, and that's why some people are reluctant to participate in this program, because you could be ordered to be quarantined and lose 14 days of work. Your employer may or may not pay you for those 14 days. On the other hand, I don't want sick people going to work and exposing others to the possible sickness.
Right.
But the fact is, we now know that something on the order of 80% of the fatal COVID cases in Ohio have been nursing home patients.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So we now know that and this is CDC information, 99.8% of the people that have gotten COVID survived. The fatality rate is very low. Now, it's certainly unfortunate when anyone passes away. I'm not making light of it, but I am saying that the extensive fear, the shutdown to our economy, has been grievous. And not just the economic consequences, Kathryn. The medical consequences of the shutdown are not being adequately considered. Here are some facts. I just read an article this week. Emergency stroke evaluations nationwide are down 40%. Of 650,000 people in America that are subject to cancer chemotherapy, half of them are not getting their chemotherapy.
That's right.
2/3 of all cancer screenings that would normally occur are not occurring. And over 50% of the childhood vaccinations that would normally be occurring are not occurring. Here in Ohio, we still are not allowed to have elective surgeries that involve an overnight stay in the hospital. You can go get an elective surgery finally after 2 months, but you are not allowed to get an elective surgery if you need to stay overnight. And there's a lady in our neighborhood, a friend of mine, she needs a hip replacement. She had a hip replacement. It didn't work. Cobalt and chromium are leaking into her bloodstream. And she needs to get in there for that hip replacement, but Jewish Hospital here in Cincinnati will not allow it because Dr. Acton will not allow it. And as we sit here today, this lady who is limping and in pain and fearful of the effects of cobalt and chromium in her bloodstream needs that hip replacement and needs to get into that hospital and needs to have it done. Do you realize, this is shocking, but this is true, because I talked to the executive director of the Ohio Hospital Association just Friday morning, okay, May 29th, okay? He told me that the hospitals in Ohio, collectively, have lost between $2 and $2.5 billion, B with a billion dollars, since these lockdowns started. You say, why? Well, because the lockdown orders required the hospitals to clear everybody out of the hospital, thinking that there was going to be a surge in need for hospital beds for COVID patients. That never happened. And so the hospitals, you would think, would be flush with cash. Oh my God, we got to have the hospitals up and running during a pandemic. They've lost a ton. And that's just one sector of the economy.
And on that note, we need to take a short break.
All right.
All right. I'm going to have all this information for people up on our websites for you. I mean, there's so much happening. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back on Kathryn Raaker's Let's Just Talk with Majority Leader William Seitz of Ohio right after these messages. We're back on Kathryn Raaker's World with William Seitz, the Majority Leader of the Ohio House of Representatives. And before, you were talking about what's happening in the legislature during this period of time with COVID-19.
Right.
And you were talking about tracing. You were talking about all kinds of things. So now let's talk about some of the issues that you really are wanting to do in this very near future.
Okay. Well, in the very near future, we have been fortunate that Congress has given the state of Ohio about $2.5 billion to help local governments and our hospitals and the state itself manage through this economic crisis. So one of the things that we need to do in the next couple weeks is figure out how to distribute that money in a fair way. So I've been working on that. We hope we get that done in the next couple weeks. Obviously, the money is needed. I've suggested one of the things we should do is create a strategic PPE reserve, personal protective equipment reserve, because that was in short supply. We have a national strategic petroleum reserve where the government keeps a certain supply of oil on hand in case of emergency. We should begin to stockpile PPE in the state in the event we need it in the future. So that's one way we can use the money. Another thing we can do is distribute the money to local governments. They are struggling. Their budgets are underwater. There's been no racinos and casinos open in Ohio for 100 days. That's big money that we're losing out on. Sales tax receipts are way, way down. Income tax receipts are way, way down. We expect there to be a number of property tax deficiencies because people don't have any money to pay their property taxes. So every unit of local government and the state are facing huge revenue shortfalls. So we need to figure out a fair way to distribute that money. So that's something we'll be working on in the next 2 weeks. This past week, we passed an absolutely stupendous bill.
And what was that?
It was a bill that deals with the next big wave of lawsuits. Mark my words, the trial lawyers are salivating over the chance to sue nursing homes, hospitals, businesses, retail, on the theory that they didn't do everything they could to prevent people from getting, contracting, transmitting coronavirus. They're looking at this as a new cottage industry.
Really?
Yes. And this is going on all over the country. So we passed a bill. I've been working on it for the last month. This week in the House, we passed it overwhelmingly. And it says that no business, no school, no government, no hospital, no nursing home will be liable unless they acted recklessly or intentionally to cause harm to their customers or employees. The normal standard is negligence, which simply means carelessness. Well, we've been in a crisis. No one saw this coming. And therefore, I don't want lawyers suing Walmart on the theory that they let Mrs. McGillicuddy get too close to Mrs. O'Leary. Instead of being 6 foot apart, they were only 3 foot apart, and therefore Mrs. O'Leary got COVID, so let's make Walmart pay. So what we did with this bill is provide businesses across this state with some sense of security that they will not be haggled and hassled with lawsuits for what they did or did not do during this period because the governmental guidance changed almost weekly, if not daily. No one quite knew what to do. And so this bill had huge support from the Chamber of Commerce and the NFIB and the Ohio Hospital Association, the nursing home folks. It had a lot of support. The colleges and universities need this security because they want to reopen this fall. They want the kids back in the dorms, but they're afraid that if they let the kids back in the dorms and somebody gets coronavirus, they're going to sue Ohio State. They're going to sue the University of Cincinnati. We can't be having that, okay?
I agree.
We've got to learn to move through this, and we cannot let a pandemic become a payday. Because really, it's a good question as to how big of a pandemic it even is.
Especially in Ohio, especially in Hamilton County.
Yes.
What is going on in Hamilton County?
Well, I can tell you a broader picture. What's going on in the state of Ohio? I asked the Ohio Department of Health a couple weeks ago, would you please tell me how many Ohioans died from all causes in the first 4 months of 2017, 18, 19, and 20? And I finally got the answer from the Ohio Department of Health. In 2017, 43,499 Ohioans died in the first 4 months. In 2018, 43,966. In 2019, 42,480. And in 2020, the year of the alleged great pandemic, the number was 43,851. So more Ohioans died from all causes in the first 4 months of 2018 than in 2020. And that tells me that there's no statistically significant difference. There has been no excess mortality as a result of COVID-19. So why then did we shut down our economy? Why then did we put our economy in a tailspin? Why then are people unable to get elective surgeries with overnight stays? Why are people missing their cancer chemotherapies and their stroke evaluations and their cancer screenings? It was also unnecessary. It was also overblown, and people are now scared. And I would submit for no terribly good reason.
That's true. And I've talked to a lot of doctors about it, and the whole thing with
hydroxychloroquine, right.
And you know what the facts are about that? They used that during Vietnam when soldiers went over. It's ridiculous what they're reporting about that. It's crazy.
Right. Well, I'm not a scientist, but I have talked to many people, and I have seen other stories on the news of people who actually were helped by hydroxychloroquine.
That's right.
There was an African-American state representative from the state of Michigan who went on Fox News, and she's a Democrat. And she said, listen, I was in bad shape until they gave me hydroxychloroquine, okay? One of my colleagues in the state legislature, his pediatrician came down with COVID and was also in bad shape, but they gave him hydroxychloroquine, and he recovered very rapidly by reason of having gotten that drug. I'm hopeful that we will have a vaccine or at least better treatments as we move forward to learn to live with this new form of virus, this new form of coronavirus. It's a derivative of SARS and MERS and other coronaviruses that we've seen before. But we need to face this as mature adults.
That's right.
Okay?
That's right.
We have been through similar crises before with the Hong Kong flu and the swine flu and the bird flu and the Spanish flu, okay? Mm-hmm. And each of those committed their own great travails on American society. Each of those took a toll. This is taking a toll. But we cannot remain cowered in our basements forever. We have a country to run. The country was in great shape the last time you and I talked on your show.
Right.
And now we need someone to lead us out of the wilderness and back to employment and economic prosperity.
And I think that's what President Trump is trying to do.
I do, and I think he's getting very little help from the media. And I think the media have a vested interest in spinning every story, continuing the fear, making sure everyone is aptly afraid, shamed into doing things that would be unthinkable 5 months ago. Can you imagine 5 months ago they said, okay, you're not allowed to have more than 10 people in one space. You're not allowed to have family gatherings. Can you imagine the churches all across the United States canceling their services for months on end because they're afraid? I'm a Presbyterian. we're not going back to church until June 14th, and we got out before Easter.
Let me tell you, we're going back to church on tomorrow, which is Sunday.
Good. Well,
200 people in the church.
okay.
Bill and I are on the altar
All right.
with mask,
Yes.
and it's done a certain way, which is very important.
Right, right.
And I believe that there have been churches out there that have been opened that have no COVID-19.
Well, you know,
That's
I
just-
think the point is these things can be done with appropriate social distancing
That's
and appropriate
right.
precautions.
That's
and,
right.
And my point to you, Kathryn, is really take yourself back to the end of 2019. Would you ever have thought that we would have been through this for the last 100 days? Would you ever have thought that we'd be 80 games into the baseball season with no baseball? Would you ever have thought we'd be this far into the spring-summer period with no Kings Island, no horse racing, no sports of any kind, no youth sports? I mean, no swimming pools. I mean, really, there are so many societal consequences in terms of increased suicides, increased alcoholism, increased substance abuse problems, increased stress by reason of people being cooped up and locked up.
And more murders.
And more murders and more
arrest-
crime.
Right, that's right.
It's so I don't think we've looked at this in a holistic way. And that if we really do look at it in a holistic way, from both an economic and a medical standpoint, I think the cure that has been prescribed by governors across this country and by health directors across this country has definitely been worse than the disease.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And I have one question. We've only got a little bit of time left.
Okay?
You have to do it quickly.
All right.
Do you think the governor of Ohio will sue China?
No, I do not think the governor will sue China. And as much as China is culpable in this, they do enjoy a certain measure of sovereign immunity, so it would be a long shot to successfully sue China.
All right. I can't thank you enough for joining me today.
Happy to do it.
You are so passionate. People really love you when you're on our show. And I want to thank you so very much for joining us today on Kathryn Raaker's World. And if you want to see anything about the Ohio legislature, you have a website, right, where they can go.
All right. You can contact me at rep30@ohiohouse.gov. Rep, REP30 at ohiohouse.gov.
And thank you for joining us today on Kathryn Raaker's World. And we'll see you next time on Kathryn Raaker's World.
There you go.
Should I-